Saturday, but I also want us to just jump right into this. All right, here we go. Slideshow. Okay, ta-da, here we go. All right, let's get right to it. All right, so this week, and we're really closing out our Ignite session. We covered everything regarding, towards the beginning, real estate expert, lead generation, lead follow-up, and now we're going into the transaction and making and receiving offers. This is the meat and potatoes of it, and there's the art of writing an offer to express directly what is important to your client. So we're basically we are that facilitator. We're going to translate that. And then when we go here, we're going to always reference back to this. When we're making offers, always try to think of it as a win-win. Oftentimes, it's easy to get into a situation where it can seem adversarial, and you might have a client, and this was an experience I had where it's like, well, if they're going to do this, I'm going to do that. Does that sound like a win-win? No, not at all. Ideally, when I try to play a little bit of devil's advocate, like, okay, what's important to my client? And let's try to understand the mindset behind the other client and maybe why they move forward with this, and how can we find that happy middle ground? Integrity is super important. Our word is our greatest gift, and it really tells a lot about our own character. So really, when you're writing offers for your clients, try to be mindful of expressing and communicating with the other licensee with integrity. And also, it's important to be an advocate for your client, and confidentiality is super important. Our customers always come first. I will give you an example on this. I've heard other licensees where like they are very demanding with their clients and say, but I've put in all this work. Yes, I can certainly understand and respect that. And the client comes first. If circumstances change for them, we always put them ahead of our own needs in some regards, right? We have boundaries, but this was in an instance where life circumstances changed for the client. They were needing to cancel the listing, and the other realtor was just very heated by it. So oftentimes we just need to learn to surrender to what is and just honor the client. We may not agree with it, and we may have certain emotions behind certain outcomes, but the customers always come first. And then the commitment. And I'm using each one of these in circumstances when we're writing offers and making offers or receiving offers. Follow through with what you say you're going to do. That is commitment. It's easy to say, oh, I forgot. It's easy to say, it wasn't my fault. I think it's personal responsibility. I think it's important that we lead with that integrity and the commitment of follow through on everything that you say you're going to do. I like Ed Walden's example of his promise book. If you make a promise, write it down and follow through on it as quickly as possible. Communication, we talked on this, I kind of covered it, seek first to understand. Creativity, ideas before results. Sometimes I won't take no for an answer. Like if they're like, nope, I'm sorry, we can't do this. I'm like, okay, well, let's find an alternative, right? There was an instance where in the middle of a transaction, a buyer all of a sudden didn't qualify with that lender. And I think most people would think, oh, the deal's done, they can't qualify. I didn't take no for an answer. I called multiple lenders and said, this is our situation, until I found one that would qualify them, and we continued that transaction. But here's the flip side of that. I didn't represent the buyer. I represented the seller. And the other licensee was newer. And they didn't know, they're like, I don't know how to save this deal. Guess what? We were able to transfer the appraisal. And we were able to get that buyer moving on with a different lender and save that deal. So just because it's not your client, what can you do to think creatively and outside the box? Okay. And that brings us to teamwork. We are working as a team, even with the other licensee, whether they're on the listing side or the selling side. If we all work, we often say we all work, play in the same sandbox. We ultimately do. So, other licensees will remember how you treat them. And I think it's super important to the way you carry yourself when you call other licensees. Are you helpful? Are you kind? Are you curious? Are you just asking questions? And are you steady? But if you get heated and you try to play bully, people will remember that. And even if they don't, I think, I don't know if you believe in karma, but I believe just energy comes back around. So put out the energy that you wish to receive, ultimately. It's ultimately surrender. Surrender to the moment, surrender to what you don't have control over, and have faith that everything will work out as it should, because ultimately it does. I have that conversation with my clients a lot. Trust starts with honesty. If you're honestly moving forward through everything, trust that everything will work out as it should. And then we also always like trust that the information given to us is accurate. Trust but verify, right? And equity opportunities for all, and success through people. So we succeed by building those relationships. Those are really, really the tenets of coming together. All right, here we go. Let's keep going. All right. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about the offer process, prepare the offer, write the offer, present the offer, receive and respond, and then we'll recap. I like to think of sales as the ability to gracefully persuade, not manipulate, a person or persons into a win-win situation. I'm going to read it again. I want that to marinate in your head. I like to think of sales as the ability to gracefully persuade, not manipulate, a person or persons into a win-win situation. So the moment you feel like I have to change their mind, is that persuasion or manipulation? Could be.
Depends on like the length you're going to. So.
Right, I agree. And how drastically you're trying to change them. Like if it's something they're adamantly against, and you're trying to sway them to something you believe, that's manipulation. But if it's something that, if they have more information or different information, you might see it differently.
Yes.
So sway.
Yes. Manipulation, definitely. Exactly what you guys said. Basically, manipulation is based on who is it serving, if it serves yourself. And people can feel that. Can you feel when people try to manipulate you? Isn't it palpable? Right?
1000%.
Yeah. But have you ever been to a car dealership where you're like, that's the nicest car salesman I've ever dealt with? I did. And I was like, man, he's really looking out for us. I felt that. Why? because they let go of that particular person, let go of the need to make the sale, and was just there to ask questions and educate and offer information. And it created such a different environment. I've had others where I was like, I felt like they were vultures and coming in, and I could feel them from so far away. Isn't that interesting that you can immediately feel without them even saying a word? Same thing. It's like, what is the ulterior motive of the person who is communicating with you? And you feel it. You can feel it through the phone, you can feel it in person. So it's yeah, just trusting your gut. All right, so let's talk about the offer process. Okay, so with the offer process, and we're gonna really, actually, I really want to go deep in this because I think this is truly important. I also created the offer process in like a very detailed timeline, and you'll be going over that tomorrow with Lance Davis. He's going to talk about what the as a buyer's representative, what are your duties? What's the timeline look like that for you versus for the listing side? But in general, the buyer makes the offer, right? The seller responds in one of three ways. They can counter the offer, and countering an offer means, okay, they want to change some aspect of the offer, so they're coming back with a different suggestion. They can accept the offer, accept it as it's written, super clean, or they can reject the offer. So those are the three choices that the seller has. Okay, so if they counter the offer, it's opening up the floor for negotiation. They're like, all right, buyer wants $7,000 in closing cost help. Well, how about this? Let's meet them in the middle. Let's do 3,500. We can do 3,500 in closing cost help. So that's, that's countering a particular offer. And if an offer is accepted, great, then you're getting right into it and you're under contract immediately. And then it begins that contract to close timeline. Okay. And if they reject the offer without even wanting to counter it, well, the buyer's agent contacts the listing agent to learn more. Don't assume no means no. So if you ever get a rejection, I love this piece of advice. If you ever get an offer that's rejected and you are representing the buyer, call the listing licensee and say, hey, and usually you will get you'll get a response typically. Most listing licensees will. They'll be like, hey, especially if it has to do with price. Like often I'll have, not often, I'll have some buyers that will want to do lowball offers. Let's just see. I'm like, you're running the risk of offending the seller. You really are. This house has only been on the market 8 days. And well, this is what I'm only willing to offer. I totally hear you and respect that. And you're running the risk of potentially them not wanting to even consider your offer. Maybe they're not going to take it seriously. But absolutely, I'll submit it and let's see what happens. I always say, we'll see what happens. That we have to be cautious about also our language. Like, do we want to say, yeah, they're just going to reject it? Don't tell them that. We don't even know.
You, like, if you know that your buyer wants to like lowball,
Mhm.
like, would you call the listing licensee and be like, this is what's coming your way, like, this is what my buyer wants to do?
Well, so here's what I would do. I would ask more questions of my buyer and why they want to lowball. Why is that important to them? And then I would field the buyer first, like, all right, give me supporting evidence of why this is. And let me actually run a CMA on this. you know, a comparable market analysis. So let's run a CMA on this to see if the numbers justify this lower offer. And if it does, if it's like, you know what, you're absolutely right, it is priced kind of high. I agree with you. Well, then you play advocate for your client and you submit those, your comparables and say, hey, we've pulled other comps and, you know, we like the property and feel that it's priced high for the market right now. Here are some comparables if you don't mind sharing with your seller as far as how I feel. So start with the client first. And then, yes, I do call the other licensee. If it's, you know, hey, my buyer wants to make this offer, it is lower than what's marketed currently. Here's the reasoning why. So we're trying to sell it, right? But I need help from my buyer. Help me understand why this is important to you. Help me sell it to the seller. So say those words. Help me understand why making this lower offer is important to you. What is it about this home that that warrants a lower offer? So dig deeper with the client. Well, I'm concerned about the roof and I'm concerned about that. Those are great points to bring to the listing licensee and be like, hey, these are points that are really important to the buyer. So they figured, let's offset the cost in order to move forward with this because there's, you know, it has an original septic system. It has a roof that looks like it has leaks. It smells in the house. You know, we feel like there are some challenges and it seems like it's going to be a lot of out of pocket expense for the buyer once they close, and these are big ticket items. Otherwise, if if it comes back and it's rejected or they counter, say, well, how about this? Have a conversation with the listing licensee. Would the seller consider, you know, paying for a new roof? Or would the seller consider, you know, repairing XYZ or whatever, what's important to the buyer? So it's like digging down deep. Make sense?
Right, the buyer's agent, I had one terminate because of repairs, and I have one that's ordering right now because of financing, and I've been surprised that the listing agents have reached out to me and been like, how can we fix this? And they want to work, like, to make the buyer happy to move forward with the sale, and that's been a little bit surprising to me, like, financing's been an issue, and I'm like, obviously your sellers want somebody who's more qualified and all these things, but they're like, hey, what can we do? How can we help? You know, what can we do with, you know, maybe prices? I've had, you know, listing agents negotiate things with me to try and keep it going.
Yes.
Which is really, it's been surprising to me as a buyer's agent, so it's pretty nice that the sellers are willing to be like, hey, we want this to go.
Yeah,
Like, let's
absolutely.
talk. So, it's been kinda cool.
Did you guys hear that on Zoom?
Yes. Hey, Sharon, may I say something real quick?
Yes.
Um, I just wanted to get your, well, I'll just say it this way. When I was very brand new, I remember like a long story short, I was dealing with a very seasoned agent and I called her. I was representing the buyer and I was afraid, you know, or just intimidated, you know, to write, you know, this lowball offer. So I verbally expressed it to her. Well, would they, you know, kind of sheepishly, well, would they even consider? She says, absolutely not. So I did not. I told my buyers, you know, no, they're not going to do it. Okay. So we didn't even submit it in writing. And later, the seller actually called me after, you know, my buyer already got another house and everything. And she was like, well, how come you didn't submit, you know, an offer and I would have taken it? And so I guess I'm trying to say I learned really fast that, you know, put everything in writing because don't trust, you know, that what, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
just put
Thank
everything in
you.
writing.
Thank you for bringing that up. Here's another thing. Don't assume that your client is going, I'm so glad you brought this up. Don't make decisions for your client. even though they've said, remember what we talked about yesterday? They may say circumstances change. They may say today, no way, I won't accept this lower offer. Something happens in life. Tomorrow they may. So always, and this is, if there's anything I could have you guys walk away with, stay curious. Always ask, if someone calls you and you are the listing licensee and they say, hey, do you think your seller would even consider this? And say, I don't know, just write it up and I'll present it. That's it. Shush. That's it. So, I don't know. Go ahead and don't do verbals. Sometimes we negotiate verbally just to ping pong back and forth, and sometimes that's okay. But the initial like offer, get it written up. And then if they reject it, have them sign it rejected and send it back to you. So we know that the seller actually viewed it. But yeah, no, Arian, thanks for bringing that up. And also like, just write it. Just write it. That's it. Super. Yay. I'm glad we talked about that. All right. So we're going to talk about prepare the offer. So prepare to write an offer. Let me move this over. All right. Prepare to write an offer. So ensure the property is still available. Here's why. Excuse me. You can blink and a property will be gone. So let's say, for instance, your buyer sees a property and it's like Friday night. Oh my gosh, how exciting. Oh, absolutely. I'll write the offer in the morning. And then you write the offer in the morning and you go to submit it and they tell you, sorry, we've already accepted another offer. What? Yeah. So as soon as you're going to write an offer, I pick up the phone and I call the other licensee. Hey there. Just calling to check in. Is this, do you have any offers on the property? Very, very important. Very important. Because if they do, then you just keep asking questions. Just stay curious. But hey, is this property still available? Has the seller accepted any offers? Don't just trust what's on the MLS because you don't know what conversations have been had. You can send a text too, but I like to pick up the phone and do voice to voice. There's power in voice to voice. Sometimes my initial request is like, hey, is this property still available? Do you have any offers in hand? Do they have to tell you? No, they don't have to tell you. Isn't that interesting? So if they're like, it's still on the market, they don't have to tell you that they have other offers. And if it's still on the market and you know it's a hot market, get on your turbo boosters and write that offer quickly and get it submitted. And then number 2, build rapport with the listing agent. Again, just picking up the phone and hearing the inflection in their voice, ask more, hey, have there been a lot of showings? And this leads us to number 3, inquire about activity. Just have a conversation. What's important to your seller? Inquire about other offers on the property and the status or the property status. Why did they fall through? You can look at the history. If it's like back on market, why did it fall through? Maybe it wasn't for one buyer, but it is for another. And why did it fall through? If it was during the due diligence period, was there a home inspection? Great. Do you have a copy of that home inspection? Wonderful. Can you send that over to me? Why? Because then we can present it to our buyers and see if they're interested. Because maybe something that was devastating to the previous buyers and they were like, yep, nope, don't want to do this. It's no big deal to the next. Or maybe the sellers had change of heart or they decided to go ahead and get things fixed. You just never know. And then find out like what was fixed from the list. Has the seller moved forward with anything? You could get creative with negotiations. If they're not willing to fix something, okay, are they willing to give a credit? Jumping ahead into negotiations, but it's asking these questions like, help me understand why did it fall through? And then can you just shut up? and just listen. We do too much talking. Let them tell you a lot. There are some licensees that will just talk and tell you everything. And you're like, great. Oh, wow, that's horrible. Wow. Why do you think? Why do you think that happened? Well, how could we make this a win for the seller? And then just be quiet and let them talk.
Happened to me, I called, one of the realtors for Air Park up in Willow. And I literally just asked him if he could send me a copy of like the CCRs. 30 minutes later, he's telling me everything about the property. And all the clients that are there and blah, 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 and it's just. And I asked one question.
Yep. And just ask a question and people will talk. And just listen, because you'll learn information that you can pass along to your client. Okay. And asking questions about seller motivations and needs. Guys, do you know how many times I've been a listing licensee in a multiple offer situation, and maybe I have 8 offers and one licensee asks me, what's important to your seller? Who do you think's going to win?
Knows what your seller wants to see.
They have a better chance. Well, obviously price, and, you know, maybe my seller doesn't want to have to move right away. They would love to be able to stay in the home and do a rent back. Would your buyer be open to that? Absolutely. Go ahead, write it up. There you go. One simple question, guys.
Sharon,
Yes, ma'am.
may I ask you, what's your opinion on, because I've done this both ways and I made a mistake. Once again, I have a lot of memories of these different things I did
Yeah.
wrong in the very beginning. Do you usually tell your seller, like if another agent calls up and they're like, okay, I'm sending you an offer in like 1 hour. Do you tell the seller or do you wait until you actually have in hand?
I wait till I have it in hand. I don't
Mm-hmm.
tell the seller. I don't tell the seller that, hey, there's talk of an offer coming in. Sometimes I may, but I'll just hold on to that information. I don't want to get their hopes up and then all of a sudden no offer comes through, and no offer definitely without a pre-qualification letter. No, it's not a valid offer to me. So I'll just wait. I'll hold that information. Great question. Absolutely.
I think I did it too because, again, when you're brand new, well, regardless if you're brand new, sometimes, especially if the property's been on a while,
Yeah.
you're trying to do it right just to pacify the seller so they don't think you're a total loser.
Well, I think you're not, and I think there's sometimes to bring hope into it, and I do not think that's a rookie move. I personally don't. I think you just use your gut and your intuition on, I need to give this seller some good news, knowing that someone's interested in the property and there's a potential for an offer to come in. So, I just sometimes play it by ear, but 9 out of 10 times I will not tell the seller that an offer is coming in until I physically have one in my hand, because that buyer could change their mind.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. All right. And then number 6, ask the listing agent how they want to receive the offer. You know, I think in this case, we typically just send it via email. I don't, there are like rare cases, for instance, I don't ever like know where you would actually hand deliver it or any other method, to be honest. So it's usually email, but here's the thing. I will add this note to that. When you are going to submit an offer and you hit send, that's not the end. You pick up the phone and you text or call the other licensee and you say, hey, I submitted an offer. I just want to make sure that you received it. Why? because what happens if it ends up in spam? In spam land, then, oh no. If they haven't seen your offer because you didn't follow up to make sure. So, very, very important, make sure, confirm that the offer has been approved, and make sure when you're submitting the offer that you have the buyer's pre-approval letter from their lender. We call it, sometimes you'll hear it referenced as a 90% letter or pre-qualification letter. And then we'll talk about, we have a guest coming towards the end, a lender, that will be coming in towards the end of the day, about 1:45. And we'll talk about the difference between, pre-approval and pre-qualification. I think that's important. And then review the MLS and tax records. So when you're writing this offer, review the MLS, look at the details. Is it on community well? Is it public water? Like how much is the community well fees? Look at the tax records. Does the owner match, the tax records? And do you see anything that maybe like catches your eye? How much taxes do they owe or whatever? Or sometimes you can pull up the tax record if it's a waterfront property and you use it, open up the interactive map, you can see, is this property in a flood zone? You can do a little bit of research up front and just kind of become familiar. Is there anything in the MLS that you need to be aware of? And then produce a comparative market analysis when you write an offer. I think especially for lowball offers. I mean, I think that's an important one. Do I do a CMA for every property? I don't. Sometimes things are moving so quickly, and if you're like in a multiple offer situation, it's like, all right, how do we clean up this offer? We know it's going to go over market value, and you just go. You do. And then you obtain a seller's disclosure statement and other required documents, and you can pull that from the MLS. Other documents that you will want to look at is an as-built survey. See if one is available. An as-built survey, for those of you that don't know, it's basically, it looks like a map. Looks like, I think of it as a treasure map. Treasure map of the property lines. It'll show you if the corners are marked. Sometimes there will be rebar showing where the corners are marked. And then it'll show where there are utility easements. This is important because you don't want to necessarily put a fence in that area or plant your favorite, plants or shrubs there, because a utility company can come and dig it all up and they don't have to put it back in place. Okay, so that easement is important to know about. Also, if there's well and septic, where's the well and where's the septic? And does the well have a 100-foot radius around it? And the septic system should not be in that 100-foot radius. Okay. We also look to see what are the setbacks for the house. Is the house only 5 feet away from the side lot line? And maybe guidelines are that the house has to be at least 10 feet from the side lot line. And there was an instance where a house had to basically get chopped. They actually had to cut off part of the house because it was too close to the side lot line. And then you're like, wait, but the listing licensee said that this as-built survey from 1985 is still good. Yeah, I understand that. We'd like a new as-built survey, please. We'd like it recertified. I'm so glad that I learned the hard way. Ask me why. Ask me. Go ahead. Ask me.
Why? How? How'd you learn?
How'd I learn? I learned because, okay, 1985 as-built survey, no problem. Well, what ended up happening is that the survey was wrong. The house was actually too close to the side lot line and we had to get authorization from the borough. as kind of like an exception, kind of begging and praying, so that way the house didn't have to get chopped off. And it was interesting. It was like when I brought in a new surveyor, they were like, yeah, he was off by like 10 feet. Something, it was crazy like that. And luckily we got a variance is what they called it. But it delayed our transaction by a month. A month. So it's one of those things like just looking at documents. Okay, so obtaining a disclosure statement, you always want to have one when you're preparing to prepare an offer. Sometimes you'll have, when you're writing an offer, sometimes if you ask for it, if you don't see any documents in Flex MLS, sometimes you'll see, you'll have to just reach out to the listing licensee. Hey, do you have a disclosure? Please, please, please make this your common practice. Has your seller filled out a disclosure? Very important. If there's any document that's important, that's one that's important to have right up front. Sometimes they'll say, no, the seller's still working on it. And if you know time is of the essence and I need to write an offer, then in the offer, you write, you know, that the seller's to provide a copy of the State of Alaska Real Property Transfer Disclosure Statement by, I usually just give them a few days or like less than a week. Boom. I want it during our due diligence period because I want the buyer to be able to see it before they spend money on a home inspection. The disclosure will have several bits of information in there. And it's important when the seller, if you're advising a seller to fill out a property transfer disclosure statement, that they fill it out completely and to the best of their knowledge and fill out anything, any changes, repairs, defects that they're aware of, but especially any repairs that have been done in the last 5 years.
It's wild how many disclosures are not filled out.
Right.
Like huge things,
Yeah.
like age of the roof.
Yep.
Everyone wants to know that, and it's almost never filled out in a property disclosure.
No, and then so don't have your buyers sign it if it's not filled out completely. You can just ask questions about it and then, you know, ping it back to the other licensee. Okay. Oops, hold on. What did I miss? Okay, let's keep going. Any questions, any ahas at this point?
How common is it for a house to not fit within the boundaries of an asphalt? Because I mean, it's interesting. We try my house. So it's-
Yeah,
like, I'm curious how common that is.
I don't think it's very common.
Okay.
But it's one of those things like, it's one of those things where it's not very common. I don't know if it was the year of as-built for me, but it was like all of a sudden it was on everybody's radar. It's like, hey, did you hear about, yeah. And so then that's important. So
I mean, I've heard of things like that happening. We had a house that had the corner cut off, stuff like that, and it's
yeah.
not me personally, but on our.
Yeah, so you'll hear about stuff like that, but it's important to, if once you gain knowledge, you know, to look at how close is it to the side lot lines? What is the setback requirement? And sometimes you can find that information, maybe sometimes in the CCRs, sometimes you'll see it in the plat notes. Yeah, so really, really important. I actually have,
Hold this. We would set it quite a bit, or I think more on like build it on decks.
yes, that's
If people do felt,
precisely. Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that too. So for those of you online who didn't hear it, you know, it's common, especially when people build their own decks or the do-it-yourselfers. And so that brings me to actually my next thought, which is so important that when clients are getting ready to add on to their homes, if they're doing an addition, if they're going to build a fence, make sure to give them a resource. Say, hey, contact the surveyor, so at least they can mark for you where you can place your fence. So you're not just eyeballing it or trying to measure it based on the as-built survey. The as-bilt's not going to give you accurate guidelines for that. And often we'll see that. I am going to send you this document. It's a documents checklist. It talks about like documents that you must review when writing an offer. So the property profile, if there is one, it'll show like if there's liens, child support or a second mortgage, the plat. You can look for easements, notes on the plat. A fun fact, and this is a fun fact for me, the plat, for those of you that don't know, it's like just, it shows a map of the whole subdivision sometimes, or like a section of the neighborhood and all the lots next to each other, right? And it'll just show you that kind of snapshot of the neighborhood and the roads and everything. But then in that plat, you'll have plat notes. Those plat notes supersede the covenants and restrictions. So often we get so hyper focused, like we got to look at the covenants and restrictions. No, also look at the plat notes. Those plat notes supersede that. The as-built survey, we talked about that, looking at encroachments and setback violations and well and septic distance. Covenants will help with setbacks and square footage requirements. So if you're representing a builder or a buyer who wants to build in a certain subdivision, what's the minimum square footage requirements for a single family home versus a 2-story home? It will state that in the covenants. Or, your client, it's really important for them to have chickens. They really want to be able to have chickens. And you look at the covenants and restrictions and it says, no, you're not supposed to like interpret it for them, but you say, here's a copy, take a look at it. And don't interpret what you think it means.
So what
Say,
if it says like, no, you can't.
Sharon?
yes, ma'am.
But it's pretty-
Right.
If it's cut and dry, but I would say, well, this section references this and send them the page so they can interpret it. And best if you could do it via email.
So,
Like,
right.
hey, here's, you just communicate via email to be able to state that, look, hey, regarding your question regarding chickens, here is a copy of the CCNRs. And if you look on this page, I see it reference poultry.
Okay. Cool.
Then they
Give
can
them the
read it and
information.
interpret it. If they're like, well, what do you think it means? I don't know, let's call title. Let's see what title says. Arian, you had a question?
Okay, 2 quick questions. One, and maybe you already said this and I didn't hear you, but do you find that most loan originators ask for the as-built to be within 1 year, or you have to get a new one, regardless if they made any changes? And then the second one with covenants, because the Valley is notorious, as you know, for having covenants, official covenants, but they're not even activated. So what's your thought on that? Like, oh, I want chickens, and technically we have covenants, but they haven't been active for like 12 years or ever.
Yeah, okay, to answer that question first, sometimes I just tell clients, you know what? Take a look at the neighborhood and it will tell you how stringent they are to enforce. You have a copy, what you do, you do you have a copy of the covenants and restrictions and just know that it's if it's in writing and it could be potentially enforced, but also take a look at the neighborhood. What are the neighbors doing? And if it says, for example, I'll use this example, if it says no RVs parked at your home, it has to be parked behind a fence. Take a look around the neighborhood. How many RVs are parked in the driveway? And is it enforced? Do people really care? No, so I'll just have them take a look at the neighborhood. Going back to the lender, no, I never have them say, well, we need an updated one. Very rarely have I seen that. Like sometimes they'll accept even one that was from 19 whatever. I think Ultimately, it goes back to, is it something that title will accept? Title usually has to approve the as-built survey. And sometimes some of these surveys will have a copyright and it's for one-time use only. So how can you use it over again? You'll need another one. So here's my advice. If you're representing a seller, always plan budget in. Even if you're like, well, we already have an as-built survey, budget in the cost for a survey. Or it's a negotiable item. If it's lender required, maybe you can negotiate to have the buyer pay for it. But 9 out of 10 times, I usually see the seller paying for it. So, and I think it depends on the loan product too. Because going back to the lender question, it depends on the lender, but in my experience, well and septic testing and an as-built survey was not necessarily required for a conventional loan. But ultimately, it has to do with title. It says title approved the as-built survey. Okay, so does that answer your question, Arian?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, super. Okay. Where were we? Okay, we talked about covenants, printing out the, like either the Muni or the Matsuboro, property tax information, because there, and here's the important, aspect of that. The reason you would actually review that, prior to writing an offer is, and here's the important one. Where did the listing licensee get the square footage from? And often they'll put it in the MLS, but cross-reference what's the tax records. Because there was a case where people have been sued because of square footage. So you always want to be mindful of what the square footage is, and always report the smallest verifiable amount, and there are different ways you can find it. You can find it in the, I always want to say the Matsuboro property tax, but you can also find it with the Muni property taxes, and then you just take a look at what the square footage is, and they'll usually look at first floor, second floor. Sometimes it'll add extra numbers. You're not going to add all of it. So if you have questions about it, just reach out to Brian or myself and we'll help you look at that. Another source to be able to verify square footage, and I feel is a lot more reliable, because when you go to property taxes, they're basically, they never step foot into your home. They're taking calculated measurements from the outside of your home. So the most reliable source to me is an appraisal. The appraisers actually go into the home and measure the house. So you'll have multiple numbers. You may have the appraiser says the house is 1,525 square feet. The borough will say it's 1,600 square feet. And then the seller says it's 1,800 square feet.
So which is more accurate, appraisal or the record?
I will go with the appraiser. You always want to like disclose the smallest number,
Yeah.
because then you can't get in trouble for having more house. Where you get in trouble. And then I know Kybe Lucas had developed this square footage disclosure where he's like, okay, we have this number from the appraiser, we have this number of square footage from the tax records, and this is from the builder. Because you can go back way back in the day and see like, what did the builder report? Because and you'll get different numbers. So that disclosure kind of covers your butt to say, these are all different numbers, buyer beware.
Now, one thing I want you guys to be aware of is when you're working with buyers, purchase and sales agreement specifically says that they have to look for that during their due
Yeah.
diligence period.
Yes. It's
And that's their time to get out. So
Yeah.
if they're wanting to know how many inches is in a property, they need to figure that out.
Yes, yeah.
Usually the appraiser is the only one who's ever gonna get in there unless it's a brand new construction and you have a builder, and they're not always right. But the appraiser is the only one that gets in there and actually measures everything. So I would say the appraisal is probably the most accurate answer you're going to get. But everyone makes mistakes. So the appraiser is not always
Right.
1,000% certain, but they have a much better chance of being close than the muni or the borough who's never been in the property. Or a seller who assumes the house is 10 times larger than it's supposed to be.
Yep.
right? So if you can find an appraiser that someone has actually done it and measured your square footage, that's your best chance. Okay?
Absolutely.
If it's important to the buyers, you need to make sure that the buyers understand, they need to verify that during their due diligence period. So that if they wanna back out for that reason, they do it during their due diligence period and they can say, hey, this house is 500 square foot smaller than I expected. No, thank you.
Yeah, super important. Thank you, Brian. All right, so, and then I'll be sending this document out to you guys. It's a documents checklist, like what documents should you review when writing an offer, and then things to look for. This is really, really great information. You know, okay, so then the appraisal, value, square footage, and notes. If there's an appraisal that's available for review, great. Not all the time, but sometimes there is. The prelim, so once, let's see. So once you're under contract, we'll be able to review like the preliminary title report. We'll touch on that later. The property disclosure we talked about, to make sure it's filled out completely. Adjacent properties, see if they're covenanted differently, and always disclose. Utilities, don't assume that all utilities are there, verify. And then a well and septic report, if there's one that's available, or being able to do research on well and septic. Is it a low producing well? Do you know where to do the research to find, you know, where the well is? Something curious that I learned is if you remove the well cap off of the well head, underneath of the cap will state when the drillers drilled what the gallons per minute. Yes. Oh my gosh. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, wait a minute, gallons per minute. That's really important. And then even like knowing how deep the well is. So anyway, we'll go more into this, but that gives you just some insights, and we have some resources for you. All right, let's keep going. Okay, so writing an offer, price and terms, seller's disclosure, conveyances, earnest money. So very, very important. When you're writing an offer, okay, so you have price, and then what terms are important to your buyer? Like, do they need help with closing costs? Some other terms could be, it is subject to the sale of the buyer's home. So, there are certain terms or clauses that we add to it. We have a bunch of clauses for you guys to use, and I'll point you guys out into that resource. And I have additional clauses, but if ever you're in a special situation where you're writing an offer, definitely reach out to your team lead, or you can always bounce questions past Brian or myself. Sometimes we have special situations where it's like, well, how do I negotiate this for my client? And there's creative ways to go about doing it. Okay, so when writing an offer, you have the seller's disclosure, you know, what conveys with the property, specifically speaking, looking at the bill of sale. We call it the bill of sale. What conveys with the property? In order for it to be financeable, with most loan products, you need to have the range, the stove. You have to have the dishwasher, and that's basically it. The refrigerator and the washer and dryer are considered personal items. There have been instances where you can't have financing unless you have a stove. So really just knowing that loan type. So what happens when you have like a foreclosure? Well, that depends, you know, it depends on the loan product and what you're getting into. But for at least the government-backed loans, the VA, FHA, those you need to have a range. You have to have a stove. Dishwasher, I don't know, that could be iffy, but definitely the stove. So yeah, just knowing, is the refrigerator staying or is that a negotiation piece? Washer and dryer, are they staying? Very important when you're writing an offer, because then all of a sudden you're like, wait, the refrigerator's not staying and the washer and dryer isn't staying? Cha-ching! Now that just cost your buyer a lot of money because you didn't follow up to make sure that it was included. Earnest money, make sure when you're writing an offer, there's a couple trains of thought here. If you're in a multiple offer situation, or I think it's probably best to move forward, and if you know your buyer is going to move forward with an offer, have them be prepared to write an earnest money check. And we want a cashier's check made out to Keller Williams Realty Alaska Group, or you can use the Earnest app, Earnest with 2 N's, and we'll point you in that direction. You don't even need the app necessarily. You can click onto that from Command when you create an opportunity in Command. An opportunity in Command looks like on that drop-down menu off to the side, it looks like a handshake. You're creating an opportunity for that particular property for that client, and there's an Earnest link right there, and then you send them a link through that, and it's like a wire transfer and it's secure. Great.
Love the app.
And so it's a game changer. I used to be like, nope, I'll just send people, wiring instructions. There's danger with that, because what if someone transposes a number, or what if you get hacked and their money disappears? So there's too much liability there. So the Earnest app is fantastic, or even just going right into Command and doing it there. But being able to present an offer with earnest money is very, very helpful, and it makes for a stronger offer, in my opinion. There have been times where I write offers where it's like earnest money due within 2 business days of accepted offer. So that's acceptable too. That's okay.
I've also started doing promissory notes because it's legally binding. If they're not gonna wire the earnest money before it's accepted, so we'll do the promissory because it's a contract.
Very good. Yeah, excellent. Okay, and then due diligence inspection period. So you're actually going to put in your inspection period for in your contract. And typically I like to put, I don't do 7 days. I usually do 10 to 14 days. That's what I do. Why? Because if they have trouble getting a hold of a certain home inspector, or if they're only available on weekends, the buyers specifically, just be mindful of your time frame. You don't want to make it out for like 3 weeks. That's way too long and dragging things out. So I think 10 days is like the sweet spot. And then, yeah, for that inspection period, and then time for seller acceptance. Okay, here's my personal opinion. Please don't put you want a response within like 12 hours. Like, that's not enough time. That's, I think, disrespectful in some ways. But my feathers aren't ruffled when I see that. I'm like, okay, we're gonna answer when we answer, if I'm on the listing side. On the other side, we sometimes representing buyers, I want to just show urgency. I may put 24 hours, like we want a response on our offer in 24 hours because we want to beat out any other buyers that come in. And what does it take to get this under contract before you have an open house on the weekend? And I'll explain. This is why we have an abbreviated timeline for seller acceptance. Typically, I think it's a lot more respectful to do 48 hours. But you do you, and figure out that time frame. Financing terms, knowing what type of loan product your buyer has, and have a good relationship with your lender. If you know they're pre-qualified, but you don't know what loan product they have, please, before the weekend hits, like, find out what kind of loan product they have. Typically, your client will know, but sometimes they might not know. And having a good relationship with the lender that will pick up their phone on the weekend and get you a pre-qualification letter on the weekend is fantastic. Loan product is super, super important to be able to know how to write the offer moving forward, because there are some loan products that have additional requirements. All right, sorry for all the dinging and buzzing. I don't know how to silence Brian's computer. Okay. And then presenting the offer with a pre-qualification letter. I'm going to say pre-qualification because there is a difference between pre-qualification and pre-approval, but we'll touch on that. But if you have a pre-approval letter, even better. But either way, presenting the offer with the pre-qualification letter, or we call it a 90% letter. If I am on the listing side and I receive an offer and there's no pre-qualification letter, I'm not going to present it to the seller until I have that. To me, it's not valid. And then on the note, going back to earnest money, the contract is not valid unless you have earnest money. So this is my personal business practice, and it should be yours. If you are on the listing side and you're representing your seller and you receive an offer and you come to an acceptance, so we come to an agreement on the contract, I'm not going to pend it in the MLS until you send me a copy of the earnest money. Why? Because it's not valid. You're not coming in to have a home inspection until I have a copy of that earnest money. So be mindful of that. And you can put on the brakes and say, well, we're just going to pause until you get us a copy of that earnest money. And be mindful, if you're reviewing a contract and you see that earnest money is due in a week, that's way too long. You should have earnest money like within 48 hours. Like they have to make an effort. Otherwise, we don't have a legally binding contract. Closing date, be mindful of the closing date. What's important to your seller? If they have to move quickly, then be mindful of that. You can always counter. You can always change that date. Also be mindful, does it give you enough time to close? Set expectations. Remember, you're going to continue to hear expectations. Set expectations with your client to know that both buyers and sellers, to know when I go through the contract, our closing date, this is a target date. This target date can shift. So please don't put in notice with your rental, with your landlord, until we're at least past the appraisal. And please know that delays can happen. If the appraisal gets turned in late, or the appraiser calls out any lender required repairs, and we have a delay, could we be delayed by another week or two? Absolutely. So please just prep your client that the closing date is a target. Also, on the contract, it says the recording date. This is different than the closing date. Here in Alaska, it's a two-step process. When in our contract, it'll say, let's say, and I'm just picking a date. So if it's on a Saturday or Sunday, please, I don't have a calendar in front of me, but let's say I say, Okay, well, our closing date will be August 1st. Wait, did I say recording? It should be recording date is August 1st. You should be telling your client that they will be signing the business day prior to that. Okay, so it's a two-step process. On the rare occasion, we have a same day sign and record. Sometimes that's possible if the lender is good with that, if they can make that happen. And we say that it's dependent on the lender because sometimes if the loan has to be funded, we're dealing with banks that are in lower 48. Okay. So just being mindful of having a conversation on what buyers or sellers can expect during closing, that it is a two-part process, and that recording happens after closing. So they'll sign paperwork on closing day, and the very next day it will record. We'll get a call from the title company where it is it's filed away with the recorder's office, and then it's official. Then home ownership has transferred. Home warranty, I have a conversation with clients regarding a home warranty, both buyers and sellers. If you're not using a home warranty as a leverage piece, you're missing out. It can be a leverage piece in repair negotiations. If the seller's like, absolutely, I will not service the heating system or whatever, I'm just using that as an example. Hey, well, would the seller be open to paying for a home warranty? Because at least the home warranty acts as kind of like insurance, but the cost is X amount. And it's like this flat fee, maybe it's like $550, maybe it can go up to $750, depending on how many add-ons you have to it. But with the home warranty, it'll for a $100 trade call fee. So the buyer can pay a $100 trade call fee, and let's say the heating system goes out. Well, then they contact the home warranty, pay the $100 trade call fee, and the home warranty can come out and investigate and make repairs and fix it and go from there. But be very mindful that when we give people the information on a home warranty, have them read the fine print, because we don't want to necessarily have a blanket statement saying, yeah, they'll fix the heating system. If you look very closely, even at the HSA home warranty, they have an aggregate cost of $1,500. So meaning they cap it at $1,500 for repairs. So just be mindful of, like, don't guarantee that it will be taken care of. Just say, hey, here's a home warranty. Please read the fine print to see what they cover and see if you're comfortable with that. Repair limits, maybe the seller has repair limits, like they'll only repair up to a certain amount. And then any special clauses, sometimes I'll put in right off the bat. I'll put in the seller to have all heating systems inspected and serviced, to include the furnace, the hot water heater, and the garage unit heater. I'll put that right off the bat. Or special clauses in regards to, and I keep bringing up septics. Septics is a big cost. It's a huge cost. Septic, to pass, or basically, I have other verbiage, but even like having the well produce how many gallons per minute, because if it's low flow, you have to really consider, like, is that to the FHA standards, and what are the FHA standards, and will we require a holding tank if the well is low producing or low flow? And so really just good questions to think about ahead of time, and we'll give you some clauses to think about. And when you're going to structure your offer, whoever, it's your team lead, or if you have a PC coach, or reaching out to Brian or I, we can help you with that. Okay? Any questions? All right, we're going to talk through the offer. So When you receive the offer, we review the contract, be sure your buyer understands the contract. So, I cannot emphasize, enough practice going over the contract, even with one another. Read the contract, highlight it, come to Brian or I, say, hey, can you help me understand this better? Like, read it, really read it, like, take it a paragraph at a time, dissect it, even though you think, well, I know what this says, really, like, read it, because it will, have little nuances there that will show up in your career. You're gonna be like, wow, I'm glad I read it. I know that the contract says this. Review details like price, closing date, inspection, contingencies, and conveyances. Know what is essential in your area, know the standard common terms for offers in your area, and avoid rookie agent mistakes. How do we avoid rookie agent mistakes? What would be a rookie agent mistake in your eyes?
Not making the contract and explaining it to your client thoroughly, and then them being surprised by something, you know, that they didn't expect or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or having your client tell you what the contract says. Yeah, no. Please become an expert and know what it says. Well, what happens if the appraisal comes in low? Well, guess what? Your contract says exactly what rules of engagement. This is a game. I think of the offer as a game, and this is a game of strategy. What does the contract state? You go to Brian and Brian, what about this? He'll always say, what does the contract say? That's Brian's famous line. What does your
Email me
contract
as
say?
well.
I'm like, man, dude, like, really? And he's like, yep, what does your contract say? Okay. So, all right, we'll keep going. So presenting the offer, double check all documents. Why is this important? What happens if there's a mistake? What if you get the wrong offer? Like, what if it's to the wrong property? Or they get the seller's name wrong? Really, really important. So, and then follow instructions, label all documents clearly, order documents logically. So are you going to like go over certain documents, with your client as far as like, let's say maybe going through, let me think about what's a good example. Typically, the order of operation that I like to go in is, presenting, the pre-qualification letter first. I'm gonna be like, hey, they're pre-qualified. Perfect. So we have that. Second, I'll show them the offer itself. Third, bill of sale. I usually like to go in that order. Here's the bill of sale. This is what they want to come with the property. If I'm presenting the offer to my seller. And then an email summary. Okay, so this is great. Make sure that you create like a template of when you're presenting offers. Or if you're submitting an offer for your client, do you have like a template of like, hey, Brian, Sharon Shaw here with Keller Williams Realty. I'm super excited to be able to present this offer to your seller. I have my client is has gone above and beyond, and you know, rather than having just pre-qualification, they have full pre-approval. So they've gone through underwriting. They are a solid buyer, and they really enjoy these features of the home. Something that we have done to strengthen our offer is you'll see attached the earnest money check. And I'm just giving you guys an example. So usually when I'm presenting the offer to the listing licensee, I'll have the pre-qualification letter first. Then I'll have the purchase and sales agreement, then the bill of sale, then I will put the disclosure in next. And maybe I'll state that We strengthened our offer because the buyer offers to pay for the appraisal without having to be reimbursed. They are willing to take the property as is, but of course they would love to have their due diligence to be able to investigate the property. But here's something that's really, really important to the buyer. They do need help with closing costs. So we've increased the offer by X amount to offset closing cost amount that we are requesting. So I'll have an email summary of some like key points of our offer because because then all of a sudden, if I'm handing this offer off to Brian to present to his seller, I'm relying on him to sell our offer. My email to him is going to have like key points of what did we do to our offer that are notable that should sell it to the seller. Does that make sense? Okay, so being able to have kind of like a summary, here are some key points that I want to highlight. I also want to just make mention that the buyer is willing to move some of these costs over to their side in order to make their offer a bit more appealing. Maybe Brian wouldn't have noticed that I had checked some boxes, and moved costs over to the buyer side. I want him to know what my summary is, so he's looking for it. Does that make sense? And then you attach all the documents. I'll even have buyers initial the MLS form.
We do.
I think that's super important. Print off a copy, or if you do it electronically, the MLS report, have them sign off on it. Okay? All right, receive and respond. So receive and review the offer checklist. Make sure the offer is complete. Confirm receipt of offer. Remember, we talked about communicating either via text or email. Hey, did you receive a copy of my email or my offer? Respond to them so they know that you did receive it. Get the offer to the seller in a timely manner. So if you're at your daughter's ballet recital, wait, you can wait. Be there for your daughter and watch the recital. It's not a real estate emergency. So, meaning timely is you can communicate to them and let them know when you will be available, okay, to be able to review the offer. But I also want to make sure that you allow enough time to review it first so that you're well versed on what's there, okay? And then create an executive summary. I like to be able to have like a summary of what are the key points of the offer. I rarely get an offer that has key points. Hey, this is why our buyer's offer is fantastic. I've made it a business practice to start doing that. So I would love for you all to try to do that. Here are key points about my buyer's offer. But as listing licensees, try to do that for your seller. Like basically here are the meat and potatoes of the offer. Buyer has made an offer for $375,000. They included earnest money. Their due diligence would end by this date and we'll have repairs negotiated, appraisal to be ordered by this date. So I'll include like key dates, and the buyers would like to be able to close in 30 days. I'm just throwing numbers out there, 30 days. And the buyers, some additional terms, buyers are requesting $7,000 in closing cost help, and it's contingent on the sale of their home. So I will put key points because, again, it's just a very quick reference. Boom, 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 boom. And here's the actual copy of the offer. Call the lender. It is allowed in our area to verify the pre-approval letter. Why? Here's the important reason. How did that lender pre-qualify the buyer? So in our contract, I'm gonna hop out of this real quick. Here's a purchase and sales agreement that I have. And so in our contract on page 2, under new financing, here, this section right here. What paragraph is this? Paragraph 3 regarding terms, paragraph 3B, new financing. It's a conventional loan. And 3BI, on or before this date, the buyer will provide the seller a letter from this lender verifying the following items: a satisfactory credit report, acceptable income, a source of down payment, availability of funds to close. Have they verified that? And that the loan approval is or is not contingent on the lease, sale, or recording of any other property. Okay. So this is important. You're going to call and ask these questions. Hey, just wanted to touch base to make sure that how did you pre-qualify this buyer? And you can go through this, and then this will also tell you, is the loan contingent or not contingent on the lease, sale, or recording of another property? In this particular case, it was contingent. So very, very important. Okay, so let's do this. And we're going to break here in about, in just a few minutes, but let's go back to this. So yes, you're going to call the lender. There are lenders that want to work really hard for you. So if you have a lending partner, I have some lending partners that are like, hey, oh, okay, great. You received the pre-qualification letter. Fantastic. Do you want me to call the listing licensee and let them know how well qualified this buyer is? Yes, I do. Thank you so much. They're your advocate. Remember to have people on your team. So have multiple lenders that you can work with and build a relationship with. Create an outline document to reference when you call the sellers. So again, we talked about creating an executive summary. It's just boom, boom, boom. Here are the key points that we're talking about and what parts of it are negotiation pieces. Okay. So creating an offer in command, this is where we would actually be opening up an opportunity. Here, you can, where the two hands that are like shaking, that's where you would create an opportunity. Let me see where we're at. Hold on. All right, so we're going to receive, review, and respond to the offer. And we're going to just go through this quickly on how to navigate that. So the buyer makes the offer, seller responds in one of 3 ways, and we talked about each one of these. And when they counter the offer, we're still in negotiation. They can accept the offer. So we touched on all of this. So let's just keep going. We're not going to role play at this time. All right. I'm going to click out of this. Do you guys have any questions before I go over a couple of things with you? All right. I'm going to open this up real quick. All right, here's an example of an offer that I received. I was the listing licensee, and we received an offer. So this was written by someone else. And I'll just go over this contract with you quickly. Just the way I would be explaining it to my clients. Okay. So here's the purchase and sales agreement. At the very top, it lists the brokerage names, who the listing brokerage is, and the selling brokerage. So I'm the listing licensee. So Nate and I are both listing licensees, and we represent you, the seller. The selling brokerage and the selling licensee represents the buyer, and that's what is covered here. Listing licensee relationships. The listing licensee represents the seller only, and here, selling licensee represents the buyer only. So this talks about the different types of relationships. Compensation is negotiable. So this is we've talked about this before, where buyer and seller acknowledge that the brokerage and licensee has disclosed that the brokerage services are not free. Compensation is not set by law and is fully negotiable. On a side note, as a listing licensee, we've already negotiated our commission. So at this point, with this offer, the buyer's licensee's commission is negotiable. Because if the seller doesn't make a certain net, well, that now becomes part of the pot. We can negotiate that. Is that the first thing I want to attack? No. I want to honor paying the other licensee. Let's see what other items we can chisel away at and then go from there. So then here, okay, the buyer is making an earnest money deposit of $5,000 and it will be deposited within 24 hours of offer acceptance. Cool, no problem. Who's holding the earnest money? This is important. Who has control of the money? Well, in this one, yes, the selling brokerage does. And that means our brokerage does not have control of it. So if we come into an issue where there's a problem in the contract and we have a disagreement, and now we're fighting over earnest money and it has to be released, who has control over it? The other brokerage. I'm representing the seller. So a good way to, don't I sound heated about that? I sound passionate. Yeah, I'm like, who has control? Like, guys, like, think about it. If you're representing the listing licensee, or representing the seller, excuse me, you're the listing licensee and you are representing the seller, you want to try to get control of that earnest money if possible. A tactic for that is to potentially ask to have the earnest money held with the listing brokerage, or the earnest money to become non-refundable after the due diligence period. That's a potential, right? Do I do it very often? No. And I should. And there are some people who definitely make that happen because they're looking out for their client. So I do it on a case-by-case basis, but this is important because if you're, especially during repair negotiations, if the buyer is asking for a lot of repairs and oh my gosh, there's going to be a lot of out-of-pocket expense, maybe even at that time saying, great, seller's willing to do this, but at the end of, but now earnest money will become non-refundable. Why? Because what happens if the buyer walks away? Now your seller's left with nothing. And in this contract, the buyer has so many opportunities, so many outs. There's so many reasons for them to be out. They could change their mind and say, sorry, we chose to not move forward because they should give you a reason, but they can use it during their due diligence period. Or there was new disclosure and then they can be out and get their earnest money back. So anyway, that's my earnest money spiel. So, and then the purchase price. Oh, here. So, don't be sloppy with writing your offers. I think it's really, really important that you fill in all of your blanks here. Normally the address is auto-populated, but here it should have said in the Palmer Recording District, and he left it blank. So we don't want to leave any blanks in our contract. If you need to fix a contract, maybe ask the other licensee, either they can rewrite it and add some things, or we address it in a counteroffer. Okay, clarifying that this property is located in the, and usually I'll reference the contract, paragraph 1, line 28, properties located in the Palmer Recording District. And make sure the address matches and that the legal description is correct. Even though it'll be auto-populated, just double check it. The purchase price is there. here, this is important. The buyer does intend or does not intend to occupy the property as a primary residence. This is a single family home. And then next we go into terms, like what kind of financing will they have? Is it cash? Will they be obtaining new financing? What loan product will they be using? And then who's their lender? And on or before what date will they provide the seller a letter from the lender pre-qualifying them? And then they have to put in a complete loan application by a certain date. Usually it should be within a few days. Sometimes I'll just, depending on their situation, 5 days to put in a complete loan application. And super important that the buyer reveals any change in their lending. Make it common practice to let the buyer know, hey, look, you're getting ready to make a pretty large purchase here. Do not make any changes to your credit status. Very, very important. Like don't make any large purchases. Don't apply for credit cards. Don't pay off any debt. Make any large debt payoffs without checking with your lender first. So don't make any changes to your credit history without checking with your lender first. Seller financing, this is for owner financing. Here, these are the costs that are split between buyer and seller. We've had several lenders that came to visit us and they gave you a cost sheet. This varies between loan products. What may be a requirement for a VA loan could be very different. Certain items are negotiable, some are non-negotiable, some must be seller's costs. Other costs the buyers cannot touch. So some items are negotiable. In this case, the buyer had a conventional loan and then they marked off, they got a little check happy. So this is where I'm going to say, please be mindful of your contract and don't get check happy. Check happy meaning with a conventional loan, they do not have a VA funding fee. So be mindful of that. Yes, they'll have an origination fee, a commitment fee, discount points. These are all buyer's costs. And this is how I explain it to my clients. These costs, this first column has to do with lender costs. If there's mortgage insurance, great. That's a buyer's cost. Lender doc prep fee, processing fee, here's a buyer's cost. Sometimes I see it split between buyer and seller. Flood certification, tax registration actually should have been marked. So be mindful. If you're in a rush, that's really too much. Yes, Maria.
You guys have a chance to take a break. Sales meeting starts 4 minutes.
Okay. We're gonna take a break, guys, and we'll pick up when we come back at noon. Sales meeting will be on another. Let me actually pause this and we'll pick up. Stand by. Come on. Let me pause recording. Okay, beautiful. So we are going to continue on with our purchase and sales agreement. And just pick up where we left off before we actually move on to negotiating offers. So we're going to just finalize this. Ultimately, what I'm doing with this purchase and sales agreement, I'm showing you, easy mistakes that could be made. And especially if you're not careful. So, what I'm trying to say is be very mindful, like dot your I's, cross your T's, take a really good look at what it is that you're putting on paper. Because if it doesn't match, guess what? You could make a mistake. And we all do it, but if you slow down enough to understand what it is that you're writing and why you're putting it on paper, then you avoid mistakes that could be costly. I'll use myself as an example. In my contract, I have put in the past that regarding the appraisal that and this is a common mistake that could be made with the appraisal here. We see, and by the way, we already went over all of the fees. These are all lender fees, all the way here down to, well, I guess even the appraisal has to do with lender fees, right? So this whole first column up to here has to do with lender fees. I like to, if you say that and you're talking to your client and be like, hey, all of these are lender fees, and next we go into just general fees and then title and then additional fees, depending on what else, you just sound like you know what you're talking about, right? But they're all grouped together here with the lender fees. So there are certain ones that are negotiable. But going back to the appraisal, with the appraisal, okay, so here with the appraisal, you see here it's under seller. So here they're stating that the seller is to pay for the appraisal. But who's advancing the funds for the appraisal? So I'm going to actually hop into my contract a little further. And further, it talks about the appraisal. And here, they're still asking that the seller agrees to advance the funds for the appraisal fee to the lender no later than whatever, and to be determined. They put to be determined only because, hold on, I'm going to pause you guys for a minute. Stand by. Okay, guys, so ultimately, if you see here under appraisal, then seller agrees to advance funds for the appraisal to lender no later than, and then it's to be determined. They put to be determined because their offer is contingent on the sale of the buyer's property. I think it's important that we always put contract dates down rather than to be determined. And then we can always amend it further on. So I really shy away from to be determined, even if it's like unknown, but we really need to have contract dates in place. Because they didn't put recording date. Oh, they did. Recording date to be determined. I think I cleaned up that offer by putting actual dates in it. If we have to extend and amend, then we will, but I want actual dates. I don't want what ifs, but I think they do sometimes do what ifs if the property's not under contract, but it was actually already under contract. So it's important to ask these questions and just know moving forward. And just give me 1 second. I'm going to try to mute. Oh, if I can navigate this. No, I don't want airplane mode. No, please don't do that. Oh, volume mute. Well, if I do this, I'm playing around. You guys can hear me. I just don't want it. No, I want to be able to hear you guys. All right, forget it. We're not going to play with this right now. Okay, super. So anyway, going back to appraisal, the importance here is to know who's going to advance the funds for the appraisal. This is really, really important. The appraisal is a negotiable piece. Oftentimes, I will see where the buyer will advance the funds for the appraisal, and the seller would agree to reimburse upon successful recording. In this case, they said, hey, we want the seller to pay for it, and we want them to advance the funds and pay for it. No, in my experience, I just feel like it's a buyer's cost, but I let the seller know I was representing the seller. They have options. They can counter and have the buyer pay for it, period, and not get reimbursed for it at all. Or the buyer can have skin in the game and advance the funds for the appraisal and get reimbursed at closing. So anyway, when looking at page Page 3 with these costs, paragraph 4, it's important. That's one particular one that even though it says seller, going back down to that appraisal to see who is advancing the funds for the appraisal, that's an important one. Sales tax, it's a seller cost. Resale certificate. So this is sometimes where I see sellers, or not sellers, selling licensees, the buyer's agent getting click happy. Look at the property transfer disclosure statement and double check to see that if there's an HOA or not. Because sometimes I'll see the HOA, all of this clicked, and there is no HOA. In this case, there was no HOA. So these are just like, was this a little bit sloppy? Yeah. And just even picking up the phone or asking, hey, is there an HOA? Okay, so these are, I don't want to call, this is not a rookie mistake. This is just, let me just click it just to cover all my bases and let me just keep going. But even that VA funding fee, when this is a conventional loan, it's just sloppy. So slow your roll so that way you're not like, oh my gosh, what did I do? So anyway, yeah, so there's no HOA. Go ahead.
Sharon, I'm sorry. May I ask you, just jumping back on the appraisal, did you already say, is it only good for 6 months?
No, I did not say that. No, and I think it depends on the lender as far as how long an appraisal is good for.
Okay,
So-
thank you.
So sometimes some lenders might have an overlay or a requirement saying that it's only good for 3 months. You know? And I think I had that recently where we were able to transfer the appraisal. But I thought it was 3 months. And again, it'll vary from lender to lender, so it's important to ask those questions. So remember, in the past, when we've talked to lenders, each lender will have a different overlay. An overlay means like a set of rules that the lender will have on top of the loan product. So if it's a VA, here's a great example. VA, some local lenders here, and I'm going to go specifically to if you have a well and you have a VA buyer. So most of my experience with most lenders here, they will only require the basic water quality test. And that would be E. coli, coliform bacteria. That's what they're testing for. There's a certain out-of-state lender that will require you to do total dissolved solids, nitrates, nitrites, lead, and arsenic, in addition to the basic water quality test. So now, if you're representing the seller and you've just disclosed that you have, hey, yep, VA buyer, but now there's an additional $250 water test. So just being mindful of that, and again, that's all negotiable, but upfront, it's negotiable. But the great question, yes. So the appraisal, it just depends on how good how long an appraisal is good for, and if you have a deal that falls apart, then is it transferable? Can you transfer it to another lender? Yes, that's possible. Just talk to the lender and keep making calls until you find a solution. Okay.
Thank you. And I
Sure.
didn't know if you mentioned for the new people about like when your seller says, oh, it appraises, already had an appraisal and it appraises for such and such, but it was a refi, how it's different.
Oh, yes, that is different. Yeah, refinancing appraisal, and every appraiser will have their own opinion. I had a client that hired myself and another licensee to represent them as listing licensees, and they thought they were being helpful by having their own appraisal. Well, that appraiser said that they were priced, you know, I'm just going to throw numbers out there, like 350,000. We went on the market for that much and ended up having to drop the price. And then when we had another appraisal, we can't use that other appraisal that was in hand because the seller ordered it. If it's a lender ordered appraisal, then usually it goes into a system where there's it's kind of like a pool, and then someone can pick up that that order and move forward with it. But it's very hands-off, and it's like that way there's no conflict of interest. Okay, so yeah, but as far as that's concerned, yeah, each appraisal can be different, and then we weren't able to use that previous appraisal. But yeah, a refinancing appraisal can also be different, and can't be used in a transaction, not to my knowledge at least. We always want to lean in on lenders. Okay, so continuing on costs, pay attention to this bottom row, these bottom two rows. Here, we received this offer, and the selling broker, that means the buyer's licensee, is requesting the seller to pay their commission. And then here, the seller is paying my listing commission. There is no transaction fee. If there was, sometimes I see it where maybe the selling brokerage will add that in for the seller to pay, but sometimes I'll counter that and have the buyer pay that. We'll go back down to towards the end of the contract. The end of the contract has additional terms and conditions, and here seller to compensate selling brokerage with a fee of 2.5% of the sales price. So they're delineating specifically the amount. Okay. So I'm giving you guys kind of like meat and potatoes and breaking down, like you see how I'm bouncing back and forth from the costs down to other parts of the contract, which will clarify some of these items. So really important, don't ignore this top box and be like, okay, it matches everything. Well, great. The appraisal brought up questions of, well, who's advancing funds? Do we have a homeowners association? Do we need to order a resale certificate? And for those of you that don't know, when there's a homeowners association, a resale certificate is something that's ordered as soon as we're under contract from the homeowners association. They have 10 days to be able to provide this either USB stick or a binder with documents. And it's usually minutes from meetings from the homeowners association. It gives you all the financial information and financial data. Like the financial standing of the homeowners association. Is there any legal action against them? Are they in the hole? Right? What are the plans for the homeowners association? You know, do they have any, what are you paying for also when you're paying a homeowners association? So, very important. So anyway. All right, so, and then here, we're going to go on next to title fees. So owner title insurance is a requirement. We need to make sure that title is clear. And so then that's a seller cost. And when I'm doing a seller net sheet, you can hop on to like Stewart Title. They actually have a calculator for you to be able to calculate what the owner title insurance fees are. Because it's on a sliding scale based on sales price. Okay. Alta title insurance is required by the lender. So it's usually a buyer's cost. The recording fee is typically split between buyer and seller. And the escrow closing fee is also typically split between buyer and seller. And then annual escrow fee or bank setup fee or that's usually for owner finance deals. When you have like a third party that is collecting mortgage payments. assume or transfer fee if you're like assuming a loan. And then here, assessments levied and pending. Let's say there's improvement to a neighborhood and they bring natural gas to a neighborhood, but all the neighbors agree to pay. So there's an assessment. All the neighbors agree to pay to have gas brought into the neighborhood. So then there's an assessment made against the property. So once they sell, they have to pay off that assessment. Who's going to be responsible for it? Typically, I see that like the seller's responsible for it. I've seen it where it's negotiated. So are there any assessments that are levied? Anything that's pending? Typically when I'm writing the offer, I write it and put it on the seller side. Any attorney document prep fees? I love the spiel that title gives. This is the cheapest attorney fee that you will ever see. It's $35 per side, you know, and really the attorney document prep fee, what that covers is as an attorney is preparing the deed documents. And that's all. They're hands off. They don't represent anyone. They're preparing it for the title company. Which brings me back to the title company. They don't represent anyone. They're just the neutral. They're the ones executing the instructions given to them and helping to facilitate the closing. Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors. Often you see these marked. And I'm going to point something out to you guys. We're going to scroll down into the contract. Once you guys get your hands on contracts, for those of you who are not licensed, please read your contract. Those of you who are licensed, if you haven't seen this and you're like, oh, I didn't know that was in there, then I'm going to say, please read it. Paragraph 16, carbon monoxide detectors. Carbon monoxide detectors, or carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless, and potentially fatal gas produced by the burning of fossil fuel. You're advised to use carbon monoxide detectors in your property and have heating systems inspected and serviced regularly. Look at what's next. Alaska statute. It's Alaska statute. So, yeah, make sure like your home inspector, your home inspector is going to catch this and let you know if there are any carbon monoxide detectors where they're supposed to be. I always add in there my 2 cents and my experience regarding carbon monoxide detectors. There's been so many homes I've walked into and there's no carbon monoxide detectors. It saved my family's life twice. Once we had a wood burning stove that was not vented to the outside and it started to smolder in the middle of the night and our alarms were going off. We did have a carbon monoxide detector and nobody woke up. I was the only one who woke up and nobody could hear the beeping. Nobody woke up and we lived in North Pole and it was like 20 below zero. And it's like, open up all the windows, get everything clear. The fire department comes out, they check the levels and the levels were really, really high. And so it's like, you know, we could have not made it. That gives me chills, but so it's like, it's one of those things like, guys, carbon monoxide saves lives. It really does, especially if there's wood burning stove, if there's a hot water heater, anything that can produce that carbon monoxide, super important. You at least have to have one on each level of the home. So highly, highly recommend. Smoke detectors, again, your home inspector will help advise this. And on a side note, also important to also maybe point to your clients that smoke detectors have an expiration date. 10 years. 10 years. If you own a home and you're like, you've lived in it for a long time, twist it off, pull it down and look at it. Has it expired? If it has, then it's time to switch them out. Okay. Okay, that's my soapbox. All right. As-built survey. Here, they're saying that the seller is to pay for the as-built survey. This is another one of those things like, oh, let me scroll somewhere else in the contract. we're going to scroll down here. You see paragraph 9, title and survey. Let's look at the last line. Survey, as-built survey or recertification of survey shall be dated on or after. I always put the date of the contract because I want a recertified survey. I don't care if it was done 5 years ago. I think it's important to always have it recertified. Now, even as early as 5 years ago, I mean, like, if your buyer's okay with it, if your client's okay with, like, it's fine. If nothing's changed, no major structures have changed, and they're fine with it, great. Okay, we'll accept the current as-built survey. In this case, the buyer had marked or as required by the lender and or title company. So if the lender requires an updated one, or they require, or the title company reviews it, and says, well, there's a copyright on this, you need to get a new one, then that's when you need to have a new as-built survey. But typically, if you're representing a buyer, always fill in the date, ask for a new as-built survey, okay? And it would be a seller cost. Home warranty, this is an opportunity to mark the X for home warranty, and then under additional terms and conditions, you can ask, set terms that the seller will pay for an HSA. Pick a brand, pick a home warranty company that your client wants to use. We typically advise to look at HSA. I know there's others out there that have good customer service as well. You can always give them multiple options, but I'll just use HSA as an example for today. You just make sure that the seller agrees. You can put in under additional terms and conditions, which is located further down here. This is where you will expand upon any requests, additional terms and conditions. So that's where you will put that here. Okay. And you can state that the seller will pay for an HSA home warranty, a basic plan, cost not to exceed $550, something like that. But we have clauses to be able to help you with those additional terms and conditions. Okay. Tests for on-site systems. Typically it would be, if you have a well and septic, then it would be well flow, the basic water quality test, and the septic inspection. Here, they only marked septic inspection because it was on public water. Okay, or sometimes it's a community well. So really the only inspection would be a septic inspection. Now, I will say, please always mark this box, the DEC, MOA or COSA fees. Some people will argue, oh, it's not required. Really? Does it have a septic system? What happens if the septic system fails and needs to be replaced? If the septic system replaces and we're in the valley, then DEC applies. Who's going to pay to have it certified with the DEC? Because that's last I checked, it was a $125 fee. So after the septic is installed, who's going to pay for that certification? So if any licensee comes back to you and say, oh, it's not required, really. But if the septic fails and we need it to be recertified, yes, we want that there because we would like the seller to pay for that. Period. Same with COSA. Who's going to pay for those fees? So very, very important. One comment on COSA, that's specific to the Muni, takes a really, really long time to get a COSA. And COSA is just dealing with an engineer and having things signed off. It's good for a certain period of time, but definitely do your research when you're taking a listing on the status of the COSA with a septic system. Because sometimes you'll have to start that process before the property even hits the market, if possible. Okay, funds at recording. We just want to make sure that the buyer has funds for recording. Wire transfer warning. We always tell our clients to just be careful with wire transfers because it can no one should be reaching out to them. Or they should never be getting correspondence from a title company requesting their bank information for fronting funds to title or wiring money to title for closing. No, have them talk to you first. You should always be that person who confirms. And any wiring instructions, if they are done, should be done through a secured channel. And most title companies have the ability for that. And then there's prorations. If you're representing a seller and you're doing a net sheet, often net sheets will, I always allow buffer. I say we need to have buffer because there's prorations for taxes or interest on loans. Here, loans being assumed, but there sometimes also are payoff fees when you're paying off a loan. And then HOA fees, if there are any fees for closing stuff out. Those things are usually prorated at closing. Service agreements have to do with like, maybe you have a service agreement on like a security or monitoring system. So unless agreed otherwise in writing, the seller will retain responsibility for any service agreements included, but not limited to security and monitoring systems. So like, is it easy to have it like signed off and passed on to someone else? Maybe the buyer wanted to be able to take on that security system, and how is that transfer going to take place? Title and survey. So we'll open up title. And when I say opening up title, what this means, for those of you that don't know, it's typically the title company is looking at, they call it dating down. So they're going to date down the names of the buyers and sellers, looking for any unpaid child support, any judgments, any liens, anything that would cloud title. And so it's really important that your contract has the legal name of your client. So if your client's name is John Jones, does he have a middle initial? And is he the third? Is he junior? Like, if he has a very common name like John Jones, then is it possible that when they pull it up and they say, oh my gosh, there's like unpaid child support, there's 5 liens against this, and then we look and you call your client, hey, John, we have this preliminary title report and we see that there's some unpaid child support. He's like, I don't have any kids. So then the next step would be to verify identity, and the title company will ask, for the date of birth, and they'll request certain things to help verify. Okay. Once you receive the preliminary title report, we'll also go through a lot of this tomorrow, but that preliminary title report is important because there are certain things that you're looking out for, but you're not necessarily there to interpret, but there are definitely places in there where you will look and be like, oh, this caught my eye, or this caught my eye. One thing also to look out for are like shared driveways. Is there an easement? Is there anything recorded in regards to a shared driveway? Anyway, that report will come out for your buyer to review. Once your buyer receives it, you're going to send them a document stating that they acknowledge receipt of the preliminary title report. And once they do, they have 3 days to review it. Let's say they receive it after the due diligence period. And they see something in there that, wait, why do we have a shared driveway? I'm just throwing that as an example. I don't want that. Nope, I'm not comfortable with that. That's the buyer's out. They can terminate and get their earnest money back. If they've received it, acknowledge receipt, and they have 3 days in which to notify the seller in writing of any matters disclosed in the report which are unacceptable to the buyer. So I'm just giving you information here to kind of like, oh man, how do I get my buyer out of this contract? If that's the case, we're really ultimately not trying to get them out of a contract, but this is an out. Okay, there are several outs. Their due diligence, receiving that report. Documents and disclosures required by law. This is super important. If a property was built prior to 1978, they have to have a lead-based paint warning. It's usually a disclosure and a pamphlet. So it needs to be signed by the seller and the seller's real estate licensee. And it has to occur before the parties sign this contract or this agreement. So if you're making an offer on a property that's built prior to 1978, you should already have, or at least request a copy of that lead-based paint disclosure. Because in that, it also, the buyer acknowledges receipt of the lead-based paint disclosure and the pamphlet. And they have a period of time to be able to do their research. Okay. Here, in this case, the seller had not finished their disclosure. There were a couple things that we needed to update. So here, the buyer has not received a copy of the State of Alaska Residential Real Property Transfer Disclosure Statement. So then we were able to provide that afterwards. The buyer has received, and do you notice these are documents and disclosures required by law? So eventually they did receive it, and then we want acknowledgement knowing that they did receive it. The buyer has received a copy of the Alaska Real Estate Commission Consumer Disclosure. Oh, they have better received that, and that's the first document that they received before even making an offer. Sex offenders, there's actually a document that you can have the buyer fill out, and they can do their own due diligence. You are not to hop onto this and do research for the client. You hand them that information and allow them to go do that research. Don't get in the middle of interpreting what's a-okay and what's not. You hand them the information for them to be able to do that research, and they need to do that research during their due diligence period. Same here. Here's another website. This has to do with drug manufacturing facilities, including meth labs. Maybe there are registered drug manufacturing facilities in the neighborhood. Good to know. Don't be, and also, what's important is, and this is just a side note, don't assume that because it looks like a nice neighborhood that there is no meth lab in there. There was a neighborhood in the valley that just looked like the cutest neighborhood, and one house that looked very well kept, and they were cooking in there, and smoking in there and whatever they were doing. But that house ended up having to basically gut everything down to the studs because it's horrible. So we actually had someone come and talk to us back many years ago regarding how they test for meth. And it's very interesting. And how basically it can affect everything. So if I ever at any time, just definitely have your clients, it's a buyer beware, really just give them the information for them to do that research. And then also a resale certificate or a public offering statement is also required for the transfer of this property. So there was one scary example of this where they went through a whole transaction. There was a homeowners association and no resale certificate, and they closed. Well, guess what? The buyers had never received the resale certificate. And they actually, I think the sellers had to buy the house back. So very, very important to get the resale certificate ordered early on. Physical inspection of the property. It's broken down into 3 parts. The first part is for them the date by when they have to have their due diligence done by. Typically 7 to 10 days. Sometimes it could be 14 days, depends if there's a holiday in there. But 10 days is really what I aim for. And then, so you put in a date for when they have to have their due diligence done by. have the buyers definitely read this because it will talk about everything that they can inspect. Buyer's inspection could include everything from square footage, rental lease agreements. So this is everything down here, heating, appliances, insulation, all the things that they could check for. Mold, illegal drug or substance manufacturing, including meth labs, whatever. So they can check for all of this stuff. And then give them a list of at least 3. If you can fill everything up with home inspectors that they can use, highly recommend that, because then they can choose from any of those home inspectors. And then the seller is going to make the property available for all inspections, including moving stuff away from walls, making sure that around the electrical panel is available. And then we also want to make sure that they have access to the attic and the crawl space. Okay, if there's a lot of stuff in the house, really hard to be able to reach outlets or check walls. So be mindful of that, because stuff could be blocking the way. And then once things are moved out of place, it's challenging. Okay. And then the next date in this section is usually by when you'll put in a request for written repairs. So if you're putting a written request for repairs, and then what date we need to have an agreement on repairs. Okay, so I keep them pretty close together. And then what happens if we don't have an agreement on repairs? Well, here are the options. If we don't have an agreement on repairs, the buyer may terminate this agreement. Buyer may accept the seller's last counteroffer of repairs and remedies, or the buyer could accept the property with any material, all property conditions and discoveries as a result of the buyer's inspection process. So definitely important, just read your contract to see, like, all right, we hit this milestone, we hit an obstacle, how do we proceed? This is your cheat sheet. This is telling you exactly how you can proceed. Okay. Insurance, buyer's responsibility to make sure the property is insured or insurable. And it's good for them to figure that out early on. I had one client who had a challenge getting insurance on a home that was a waterfront property. It was a beautiful property, but I think it was the type of shingles that was on the roof, or I don't know what was the challenge, but I think it was even the age of the roof. They wouldn't insure it. So she had to like shop and shop and shop for insurance companies. I was just very surprised. Yeah, I think another client I had who had cedar shingles. Very interesting. That also has you like kind of pondering like what kind of insurance company you're looking at. And there was one where there was a house that was really dilapidated. It had no exterior covering. It was just plywood. And that was a difficult one to insure as well. So very, very important to figure that out. Appraisal, we touched on that a lot. So who's going to advance the funds for the appraisal? And it needs to be ordered, typically, we advance the funds for the appraisal after and get it ordered after we negotiate repairs, because that's a milestone that we're moving past. Because if we haven't negotiated repairs and the deal's going to terminate, then why would we have the appraisal beforehand? But many lenders now are ordering the appraisal as soon as we get under contract. And some, not all, some may order it and not necessarily collect money upfront. Others will collect money as soon as we have a repair and negotiation. But the reason for ordering it early is because then it begins the timeline for the appraiser, because sometimes they have 10 days to be able to submit the report from the date of order. So remember that when you're going to put a date here, you authorize the lender to order the appraisal by, and let's say it's after repair negotiations by 4/2, And you're like, okay, by 4/3, we'll order the appraisal. But if you have that closing will happen, 7 days after you order the appraisal, you have not allowed enough time. You need to allow at least, I would say, and I guess that depends. Because what happens if you order it and then it takes 10 days for it to be received? And then you have, once the lender receives it, they review it. They won't release a copy to you yet. They review it. It takes 48 hours for them to review and approve before they release it to you. And once they approve it and they've released it, if everything's okay, yay. Like meaning the value's good and there's no condition issue, then usually from that point, you can close a week later from receipt of the appraisal. Okay. But then also the appraisal paragraph covers like what happens if it doesn't appraise, and in the event if it's a FHA or VA loan, well, we have a VA FHA, a mandatory clause that would supersede the contract, and it basically states that then the borrower is not required to move forward with the contract if there's no agreement made or no negotiation made and no agreement, then they're not obligated to move forward and they can get their earnest money back. Okay. So if, let's say, for instance, let's say a seller and a buyer have not reached an agreement regarding any lender required repairs. And when we say lender required repairs, sometimes we'll have an appraiser call out repairs. And we remind our client that an appraiser is not a home inspector. Often in the lower 48, folks think that an appraiser, oh, I'm not worried about it because if it's health and life safety, the appraiser's going to find it. I'm like, have a home inspection because your home inspector is working for you. The appraiser is working for the bank. They're looking for value and condition because your bank is the one that is fronting and lending you the funds. So they are, if they have knowledge of any health or life safety items, or depending on the loan product, they have a checklist that they have to go through. With FHA loans, they have to be able to take a photo of the attic. So they stick their head up in the attic and they'll take a photo of down in the crawl space. I've had appraisers call out paint on the exterior of a home. If it's really chipped and it's just showing poor condition and peeling paint, they will require that the house be painted. And so then, boom, wow, now we need to negotiate that one. I've had an appraiser call out handrails for a back deck that sat more than 30 inches up off the ground. It could be 33. So if anybody's listening to this that knows the exact measurements, it was greater than 30 inches up off the ground, and they wanted railing all around that deck. Or let's say they also had called out that railing in an upper level, like railing coming down the stairs, and even like this railing on the upper floor, the slats were too far apart. And they were concerned that, you know, a little one could stick their head through and fall through. So that's something to be aware of as well. So lender required repairs. I had an appraiser also call out a garage door. The garage door that goes into the main house, it had a doggy door through it. So because I knew this and I had a client in the future, like it's happened multiple times where people are like, cool, I just want a doggy door from the main house to the garage. So they have a doggy door there. Well, the appraiser called it out because it's supposed to be a fire barrier that fire rate door.
Boom.
Hey, Toby, can you mute yourself?
Oh.
Because I can hear you bumming. So, so otherwise, yeah, so if it goes into, like in stuff like that, it'll be called out, and then there's usually, solutions that can be found, moving forward. Our solution for that was, putting metal on either side of the door. The appraiser was okay with that. And the buyers were okay with that. I was actually representing the buyers. They were totally okay with that. They're like, yep, we don't care. Okay, great. For me, if it were me, I'm like, I want a brand new door. But I'm not going to, I'm like, this is the solution that the seller gave. Hey, buyer, what do you think? I'm not going to give them my like, this is what I would do. But if they're like totally cool with it, great. There are instances where I would be like, okay, well, think about this. They're like, oh, we'll replace it, no problem. Like, you have to pick your battles. This is part of like that negotiation. And then recording in possession, just make sure that you have enough time to be able to close the deal. So talking to your lender, closing out a conventional loan versus an FHA loan or Alaska Housing. Let's say it's there are certain Alaska Housing loans where it goes to the lender, and then it also has to be approved directly with Alaska Housing. So it's like a two-step process. Not only does the file have to go into underwriting with your local lender, but then it also has to go to Alaska Housing. So talking to your lender, hey, I'm writing up this contract. How much time do you think we need? Do you think 50 days, 45 days is reasonable? Or hey, do you think you can get this closed out in about 30 days? Your lender will tell you what are they seeing. And I even allowed sometimes just a little more buffer. It used to be that this is what it used to be for us. When I was writing contracts for VA loans, I wouldn't write it for any less than 60 days. No less than 60 days. Because it used to be from the time that the appraisal was ordered, the appraiser had 10 business days to complete the appraisal. And it probably is still that way, but I see them moving faster. It's quicker, but if this was 8 years ago, we'd still be closing in about 60 days, maybe 50-ish, but it would be a happy surprise if we could close sooner. Okay, so that's basically it. If it's a tenant occupied property, very important to have an estoppel certificate. It's a totally different document that the tenant actually fills out. So if you're representing the buyer, you want to request and put verbiage in there in your contract, you'd like an estoppel certificate, and this is something that the tenant fills out, stating how much is their rent, how much is their security deposit, is giving their perspective on what the lease truly is, and you'll request a copy of the lease. So that way you know when their lease ends, who's holding the deposits, are you moving forward with those tenants? It gives a lot of information. We talked about carbon monoxide detectors, home warranty protection plans, and then also brokerage notice regarding earnest money deposits and refunds. I always tell our clients, very important to know that when you give me this earnest money, it's going to be deposited into our broker's trust account. It will be deposited. Like if you're writing a check, it will be deposited. And as far as that's concerned, then having that conversation with them and letting them know that in the event this deal doesn't go through, then yeah, if we're within contract and you can get your earnest money back, then just please know that it could take up to 14 days for you to get a refund. And just set that expectation. Termination, if there's if we have to terminate a contract, it's done in writing. We have a termination form. Time is of the essence. I always tell my clients on both sides time is of the essence. Like, we have contract dates we have to meet. This is a legally binding contract, and it could put your earnest money at risk if you are not, if I can't reach you. If you're going to go out of town, please communicate with me. So those are things that we talk about. And if there's a dispute regarding earnest money, what does the contract say? And then, if there still is a dispute, then we involve brokers. And again, who holds the earnest money? He who holds the earnest money ultimately has the power over the earnest money, truly. So if it's possible to get it in your court, it's beneficial. If we can't come to an agreement and there is a disagreement, then we go to mediation and then before commencing to litigation. And then it just talks about costs and expenses and such. So also knowing, like, if your client is a foreign person, are they a resident or not? And does this Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Act apply to them? Also here, authorization to release information to brokers. This is just authorizing us to be able to have a communication regarding anything real estate with anyone involved in the transaction. The only thing that I'm challenged by are out-of-state lenders who will not release the copy of the appraisal to me. And I've had that happen. And I'm like, it clearly states here that, you know, you can release this to me because, but no, they won't honor that without getting authorization from their client first, even if you're representing them. So just be mindful, especially out-of-state lenders. And that's an important thing to ask and have a conversation about. Okay. Attachments, here you would put the FHA, VA, and mandatory clause if this applies, and then additional terms and conditions. So we'll cover some of the clauses later, but this is where you can put earnest, you know, request for closing cost help. And then there's specific verbiage that you can add because you want to make sure that all of the not earnest money, sorry, all of the closing cost help, if it's being offered to a buyer, making sure all of that money is being used. So if you're representing a buyer and you've requested their closing costs to be covered, right before closing, make sure you're having a conversation with the lender to make sure every single dollar has been used. Is there money left on the table? Can we use that extra $600 to buy a home warranty? Yes. Guess what? Now you've become the champion for your client. Make sure there's no money left on the table. And if you've already had closings under your belt, go back and take a look at your settlement statement. It'll be like, oh, like, let's say this is $15,000. Okay, well, maybe only 10,000 was usable. And okay, well, all of their closing costs were covered. That's all that could be applied. Well, can the buyer buy down points? How else can we use the money? Buying down points means buying down their interest rate. So having a conversation with the seller, or with the lender, if you're representing a buyer, is super important. Don't leave money on the table. Okay. And then usually there's, you know, acceptance and notice of acceptance of delivery. It could be hand delivered via email or via fax. Most times we're seeing it via email. Again, verify that it's been received, get confirmation. And there's an expiration date here. Hey, we want a response or a signed acceptance by this date and time. If you do not receive a response by that date and time, and they're preparing a counter, don't fret. It's fine. But basically your offer's expired once you have this date. As written, it's expired. Okay? And then the buyer signs, and everybody initials the bottom of every page. And then this is the seller response page. They can accept the offer as written, seller makes the attached counteroffer, or the seller hereby rejects the foregoing offer and declines to make a counteroffer. Okay? So that's their choices. All right, so let's get back to business here. Yep.
Matt, on me, and I think it's good practice, like, you're writing that, don't leave any gaps between your bullet points on the terms, and then at the end, put like a solid line across, nothing further,
Mm-hmm,
that way, you know, people can be shady and add stuff in there,
mm-hmm.
accept it, and then now it's.
That has not been my experience.
I'm not saying it will happen, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
like, don't leave that group in there for
Yeah.
them to sneak something in.
Right. No, that's a good point. And I think if something is snuck in, I think you can definitely verify that. That's actually a true statement, but then it depends on who it is and who's actually sneaking that in. That's so true. It could be argued, especially based on how it was initially written and received via email. So your emails are a great source of keeping track of how things were documented. That initial email. Yeah, I think that's okay. That's a good valid point. All right, so let's go. We're going to give you this document tomorrow. I created this last night, contract to close timeline. If you represent the buyer, this is basically everything that you're finding out from beginning to end. We'll review this tomorrow and you'll get a copy of it. If you represent sellers, what kind of things should you be looking for or asking? So I threw a lot out at you verbally here, but this will actually be a good reference for you. Yeah. So I was like, what do I do next? Oh my gosh. This certainly will help. All right.